Welcome to Kodachi for Three, a bi-weekly podcast where three friends and passionate players discuss the world of Wraith. If you're looking for flesh and blood content, we've got it. Focusing on competitive play, community building, and yes, going off on plenty of tangents. From our favorite casual builds to the market, nothing is off limits. So sit back, relax, and prepare yourself for Kodachi for Three.
Welcome, everybody. We are your hosts for Kodachi for Three. I'm Adam Roach.
I'm Drayton Ganz.
And I'm a painfully tardy Shay Ramsey.
Yes, it is only 2 hours after we started recording this, but we're ready to go, and we're going to hit you with some good content tonight, I hope. So coming off the Dallas-Fort Worth calling, we wanted to get right into it and talk about a featured card for the evening. And I did want to choose a card that was widely played and drafted, but not necessarily tied to a specific hero. So that leads us to our featured card this evening, which is Earthlore Surge. And Earthlore Surge, I've just got the red card pulled up here, but you can subtract +1 to each of them for yellow and blue. Earthlore Surge says the next attack action card you play this turn gains +5, gives you go again, costs 2, pitches for 1, 2, or 3, and blocks for 2. It's an Earth action, so it can only be played in Earth affinity decks. So what do we think about this one, guys?
This is one of my, like, 1 or 2 red Earthlore Surge in a draft for Briar or Oldham is, like, just pure, it's all around good. I actually also really like the blue one because +3 in a pinch, pitch it for 3 resources. Seems solid.
Yeah, I mean, I think all 3 versions are very strong. I liken this card to Slogism a little bit from Welcome to Wraith. So Slogism was you pay 3, you get +6 in the red, but it was only limited to your more expensive card. So playing that combo line suddenly got a little bit harder. But this one, it says your next attack action card, period. So it could be a 0-cost attack. It could be a 3-cost attack if you are playing something out of Oldham. So you can play those crazy wombo turns, but you can also kind of just, on a 3-card hand, still do really effective things with this card, which is what I think makes it really strong.
Yeah, absolutely. Plume is a thing in this set, so the equipment Plume that allows me to go and grab it out of my discard and bring it back and play it again. Honestly, on demand +5, on demand +4, on demand +3, always amazing.
Yeah, it's great for fusing. Like, you can fuse the Bramble Spark with it, then play it. Like, it's just pure gas. The only thing that is rough inside Briar is that 2 cost. It's a little rough sometimes, especially if your opponent's getting any kind of frostbites on you. It might price you out of it. Though that is kind of why I like the blue version of it, where it has a little more of that, like, you know, bonus kicker, but you can use it as, like, econ and, like, a fuse target.
Yeah, that's fair. I am typically only drafting the red or yellow here just because I'm kind of minimally drafting it and or picking it in sealed and trying to recur it with that plume. So I just don't want to see a ton of these. But you're right, 1 or 2, and I would play the blues. I don't think it's an unplayable card at all.
Yeah, no, I think all the versions are very playable. Blue, I think it's a little more work out of Oldham specifically in my mind, just because you can then also use it as a D-react, block for 2, and then save it for later in the game, because buffing +3, that late game stage where you've cycled back around can be really strong and limited. And Oldham is one of those that's more likely to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out the Earth Defense React is exceptional in limited formats.
Also, the ice one, man. I was playing in our draft thing we did on Thursday, and I played against an Oldham who's just constantly making me put my cards back on the top of my deck, and that was quite annoying.
Yeah, absolutely. It does turn out, especially in the limited, where it's Aria heroes. Both Lexi and Briar want to play a ton of their hand and do typically have follow-up actions. So,
yeah,
they're not like good old Dory who can just spam out her hand when they respond to that.
Some good stories from a local tournament. Oldham being just a tad frustrated by the old girl.
Younger in this case, but yes.
True, young girl in this case. It was a blitz event, but yeah, that ability is not great against heroes that are reacting because, of course, as a reaction itself, it does just add it to the stack, which means then you can play your instance, your own reactions, add on top of it, and those would resolve first. But still an exceptional card for ruining Briar's 10 different attack turns, things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of ruining Briars and 10 attack turns, I guess do we want to move to talking about the calling?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll cover really quick that this episode is going to be fairly Drayton-centric. He was, spoiler alert, top 4 in the calling in DFW. So we're going to do a pretty in-depth interview with him for that. But we wanted to talk a little bit about my experiences and your experiences, Shay, and just all of our opinions on the calling overall. So how do we feel like the calling was overall? Do we feel like it was ran well? You know, what was the process for side events? What stood out to us? And the vendors, things like that. Let's just give a quick overview. So what do you guys think about that kind of thing?
So I'll jump in here just because then I'm not going to have much to say after that. But I think it was ran very well for the scale of the event. I think that initially they were having a little bit of issues with their intercom system. It was really hard to hear and distinguish what they were actually talking about, especially when we were in the deck building process for the sealed. That seemed to get better as we went deeper in. So I think that they had some initial hiccups, figured out what they needed to do differently to project better. Because I was definitely able at other times during the event, able to very clearly hear what was being announced and what was being called out, especially during the draft portion. So I do commend them for addressing that and working on that. If there is one thing that I would say is comment that I think we as a community can also look to better on was I think that we still had some judging consistency errors. Just both in personal experience and also what I heard from a lot of people. There wasn't a lot of consistency from judge to judge, from call to call. But I mean, this is we're still a kind of young game. We have a brand new judge program that's being rolled out right now. And I think as a community, if we want this to grow and be better, we have to invest in that, right? I know I personally am trying to get certified as a judge right now to be part of that community and, be certified to help out in these types of events as well if I'm not playing in them. And I think if you are a community member where hey, quality judging is something that you care about, get involved, sign up for that, and actually get certified, because the only way to make this less of a thing in the future is just honestly more people be able to judge.
I think that's very fair. As somebody who played mostly side events, I definitely heard some calls that were at the very least questionable, and one or two that were straight up incorrect as a certified judge myself. That being said, it was minor, it was rare, and overall I think their judging was solid. So I don't want to sound like I'm saying coming down with the hammer there.
I want to be clear. I had some great conversation with not just judges involved, but also the head judges, and talked about lots of things with them. I think that again the event was ran fantastically. This is just if I have to nitpick one thing in an area where we can improve as a community as a whole, that would be my comment. It's one of those things it's a 9.5 out of 10. How do we get the last 0.5%, right? It's the nitpicky grading on a card type situation, right? It's that stuff going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a good time with it. In the pleb tiers, there was no issues with judging calls. It was, it's cool. We didn't find those niche case scenarios in Shayland.
Nobody was arguing the intricacies of your final turns.
Yeah, no.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So, what were you guys' impressions of the vendor situation and things like that then? How'd we feel?
It's fair. For kind of how these kind of events go, there was more vendors than I expected. I was able to buy my sleeves. I was able to sell off a few cards to make a little bit of money. So they were buying cards at a fair and reasonable rate. So it wasn't I didn't do anything with the convention center vending for food and stuff. So I don't know if they were charging us $8 for water or something, but
I believe they were, but as somebody with dietary restrictions, I didn't touch any of them outside of the smoothie shop, which was excellent.
Well, you should have. I had all of the dietary restriction-friendly snacks in my bag.
I know, but I get distracted, so that was the issue. From my perspective, at least day one on Friday, like, it looked pretty thin to me. I think I was expecting bigger and more grand things, but that did immediately fix itself on Saturday. That's when the bulk of everybody showed up for the main event. Vendors, I just don't know what I was expecting, right? My convention and that type experience is more on the level of Gen Con or Board Game Geek Con or things of that nature. So I'm used to like 100 vendors, not 10. But the vendors they did have were all great. They were very social, talking with the community. I think I spent the most time at Stomping Ground Games. I hope I'm correct there. I sold some cards there. They're a brand new company. They seemed like they were giving good deals and really kind of working with the players. And for the most part, really chatting with people as well.
I can
excited. I got some Dragon Shield Petroleum sleeves. So that's a color I can't find really all that often anymore. So I got my very fun blue.
Yeah, I got more of the new ones that have the black insides, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I don't 100% know what those are called. Those are old colors, but they make it to where you can't quite see.
They
are
the dual matte Dragon Shields.
Dual matte.
I have
yes.
some right next to me. They are probably my new favorite go-to sleeve if I'm just looking for normal sleeves. They are fantastic.
They tend to be the colors that I prefer, so I'm sleeving virtually all my decks in them at this point.
They have a very good feel to them. And I can confirm the group you were thinking about was the Stomping Ground.
It was. Okay.
The other interesting thing about them was that they are not running events. So because they are not getting event kits, they were also dealing in promos, which was also kind of nice to be able to A, offload some promos, and B, if you were looking for a particular promo, be able to pick it up from a vendor as opposed to having to like find a way to barter with another player. Not to say that I don't want to interact with the other members of the community, but sometimes like if you're looking for a highly sought after promo, sometimes it's hard to find the exact one you're looking for.
Or if you want the liquidated Caverdine, because no one wants to go through the trouble to try to sell off their cold foil Caverdine.
Sure, yeah, especially a lot of the older young heroes that came from the armory kits and things of that nature. Those of us who grind games, those of us who play a bunch, you're likely to have several of them. The fact that they needed to build a stock was excellent for it. No, you probably didn't get as high of a price as you could have got online somewhere if you really hustled, but then you've got to, again, hustle, go through the effort of mailing, go through the effort of haggling back and forth. We've all had that experience where one person is like, oh, there's a tiny little nick in the side of this card. It's not going to BGS grade 10, so I'm going to send it back. So they were quick, efficient, and I was happy with them, and I recommend people visit them. So we'll give them that shout out. I assume they'll be at all callings. So
no, they'll be at Orlando. They weren't going to be at Cincinnati, which was as of this recording happening this weekend.
Fair enough. Yeah, we're actually going to talk about Cincinnati just a little bit later because some of those numbers have been coming through, and so I'm going to add that to some of our questions for Drayton, just because I think that'll be fun to talk about. But we'll say since the rest of it is going to be very Drayton centric, what do you guys? So Shay, how did you feel about your events? Walk us through what you did.
All right. So I woke up at 5 a.m. Because I had to drive down to Dallas that day and drive back from Dallas that day because I did not have the husband points to get multiple days down in Dallas. So I woke up. I had my barrel of coffee, which is about 48 ounces of a wonderful fall cold brew that I chugged on my way down to Dallas that morning. Got to the venue around 8-something, sold off a few cards before the main event started, and, proceeded to open my sealed pull and realize, it's like, I still have like 3 side event tickets with the package I bought because I thought I was going to be there multiple days, so I'm maybe playing for the lulls more than for the win there with my sealed pool. Ended up going 2-2 and dropping my 2 losses. I feel the games were close, but somebody may have been like, I'm going to play my Ice Storm, and went down to 1 health and then died. And then he thought his Flash Freeze had the effect of his Ice Storm, went down to 1 health and then died.
There are so many things I'm worried about here.
Yeah, it's cool. I was on a lot of caffeine and not a lot of anything else. So then I proceed to go and hit up the on like the draft pods that were firing as soon as like 8 people were there. Did okay. Just intentionally drew at the top with one of those. Got an okay amount of prize tickets to get the fancy deck box. But the highlight of my whole Dallas calling is, to my knowledge, I was the only person to pull the Fabled. So got me a fancy tree and was able to sell that off and earn back some of those husband points that I have been definitely lacking.
Fair enough. I mean, hey, that sounds like a bit of a rocky and very caffeinated road, but at least you had fun with it and, again, stayed out of the doghouse, which is important.
Yeah. It's actually my first time playing Lexi in a sealed or in the draft pool with Tails. I had kind of stuck with Briar on all the events I'd gone to previously, except one excursion to Oldheim, which was ill-advised. I don't recommend. It was a lot of fun, actually. Sealed in draft Lexi is like a blast.
I do think that there was at least one other Corsham pulled. If my memory serves correctly, one of my opponents, I think it was my last opponent of the Swiss, he pulled the sealed Swiss that is, because we had a deck check and he almost forgot to give it to them before the deck check, and so he panically ran over and was like, please put this with the rest of my cards. I forgot that I had pulled it to the side because it's very valuable. So that was comedic.
Okay. Yeah, over at the draft pools, they're like, we haven't seen anyone pull the Fabled yet. And then
you pulled it?
I cracked my third pack and it was there, and I just silently sleeved it and was like, well, I've won this draft, even if I don't win this draft.
Fair. Okay, I guess on to my experiences. I got there on Friday. I got there a little bit earlier than the rest of the group here. So I kind of just met up with a few people from the Oklahoma City area, talked and chatted for a while. I ended up playing the daily double that day and one draft pod. I think I ended up winning the draft pod and going 3-1 in the daily double there. Next day, coming into the calling main event, I had a mediocre pull, average, nothing to complain about, nothing to be excited about. I ended up doing, I think, 3-2 on the day, or 2-1-1 on the day, something of that nature. I remember I ended up taking my second loss on a time issue. I did call the judge multiple times on that. We didn't end up getting an extension, but there was some slow play issues going on. So if I were to complain about any judging things, I think it's really just how we deal with slow play. Not the judge that interacted with me, but how we deal with slow play in the game. Other than that, had some odd matchups. I believe I had somebody played Sting of Sorcery into 2 Ball Lightnings. That's painful, but hard to complain about losing to that. So I dropped out, played in more side events. I think I ended up playing over 30 games on the weekend, and I think I ended up doing like 28, 2, and 4 or something of that nature. So it was a good run. Farmed a ton of tickets off those daily doubles. I think I went 4-0 in 2 of them, which ended up with me having enough to get a couple of those big heroes, get them to some local players that really wanted and value them, because it's not really my thing. I'm not hanging them up in the office or the house here, but I do think they're cool. They're actually quite heavy, so the prize wall was a little cooler than I thought it would be. I don't want to go too in-depth on my stuff. I might interject a few of my thoughts if anyone cares about them at all as Drayton is talking. But I think we want to get to the meat and potatoes. The man, the myth, the legend, the Arc Knight himself. And I want to be clear to the listeners out there, we are going to avoid talking about the ProQuest here. We're going to have a mini episode coming up in the very near future covering this event. We've got an interview with one of its players coming, so we can fully discuss the CC meta, what we see so far in the first event post-Aria release. We're also going to do a tier list for CC and a tier list for Blitz. So keep in mind those things are going to be coming. That'll include the Aria heroes. So don't think we're forgetting that here. We're just excited to talk to Drayton about the main event and his top 4 finish. So, Drayton, top 4.
Yes.
How were you feeling going into day 1? How was the morning?
So I was the one who set the alarm, and I proposed the time. I was one of two in our room of four that actually got up to the alarm, but I took a shower, which is what I normally do in the morning, and then we all left for breakfast. That's not to say nobody else showered, but just to say, like, it was pretty normal morning for me. I felt pretty well rested. Not perfect sleep. I mean, when you share a hotel room and you're not sleeping in your own bed, you can't expect to like get a perfect night's sleep necessarily. But I mean, nothing that I would initially say I was exhausted or anything like that from. But I was feeling pretty good. One thing that I always try to do when going into one of these events is I try to eat like a hearty breakfast, not necessarily like, oh, I'm just gonna stuff myself to the point where I'm like gonna like explode, but just like I've eaten enough to where if I have to like have a late lunch or skip lunch, I'm not going to cry and die. So yeah, I was feeling pretty good.
Fair enough. Yeah. So you didn't take the just drink a near lethal amount of caffeine to start the day. Okay.
I did not even. I don't think I had coffee that morning actually, but I'm not really a big coffee drinker. I'm a weird freak like that.
So honestly,
Alright.
the tempo and timbre of Drayton's voice that you hear today is the tempo and timbre that I hear him at all times. Like, this is just who you are awake or asleep in my mind.
Yeah, I do talk fast sometimes. It's not because I'm hyped up on caffeine. It is because I have a ADHD addled brain and it goes all the way crazy sometimes.
Fair enough. So, all right, you've had breakfast. You've got to the convention center. You've sat down. You've got your packs in front of you. They meticulously explained exactly how you have to do everything multiple times. You've cracked your packs. Are you going into that building that sealed pool with any kind of hero preference there, Drayton? I know you are a Runeblade connoisseur, and that Briar is kind of like your happy place. But when in doubt, Briar seems to be how limited goes with Tails.
So, I mean, I will say I did have a preference of Briar, but that's mostly because I had been fiddling with her in CC a little bit before the event. I was honestly happy and had practiced with all three heroes and was more than happy to build a sealed pool of all of them. I felt like they were all super viable in sealed. And like I honestly do still believe that they are all very strong. I don't even personally necessarily believe that Briar is necessarily the strongest. I think Oldhim actually can have a little more consistency when played really well. Briar just fits my personal playstyle a little better than him at the moment, I think. But I think they're all very strong. I think people clutch on Briar a lot because I've said it once and I'll keep saying it. I don't think people have figured out how to play against arcane damage with no arcane barrier. People are just so used to being able to like, I pitch this card and I make it go away, and you can't do that in this limited field. And so you have to adjust how you're playing against the physical damage to account for that. And I think that's just something people are still struggling with in general. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to go into Briar because of that. But I was actually extremely close to going Lexi. I had a very strong Lexi pull as well. I think I had three, what is it? Frost, not Frostfang, but what's the ice arrow that makes you discard a card? I had three reds of that card.
Oh, Chilling
alone.
Ice Feint?
Chilling Ice Vein, yes, that's it. I had three Chilling Ice Veins in red, and I was just like, that's pretty gross. And I was very strongly considering going that direction just because of that. But ultimately, again, Briar was kind of more of a comfort zone for me, so I ended up going that direction, and obviously it paid off.
I think if they're marginal,
definitely.
you definitely go your preference. Before we ask our second or our next question here, I do want to say to everybody who's listening, we are recording this on the same night as the first day of the calling in Cincinnati. We've seen some of the data come out. So I'm going to cover that 67 players made day 2. And of those players who made day 2, 51 of them were Briar. So I just want to make that clear for everybody. Before we go into this next question, what are your thoughts on the balance in the sealed environment? And how do you feel about sealed for the format of a large event?
I mean, I just kind of a little bit covered that. And I'll kind of reiterate that, like, I do feel like this is an extremely well-balanced set. I did a lot of sealed practice. I personally opened 2 cases of product, and one of those was pretty much exclusively used for sealed practice. Literally meeting up with some other players from our local meta, and basically like we cracked 6 packs, we made a deck, we talked about it a little bit, we played a game, we talked about it a little bit after that, and then we went on to the next 6 packs. Like just cracking out like games and rotating through things as quickly as humanly possible, just to like get a feel for things. And I played every single hero versus every single hero in that, and did fairly well with a lot of them. So I was comfortable going on to any of them. I think that like you have to kind of look at what's the line of play of each of them. Oldhim has the fatigue with big swings, and also just the consistent for 4 with his hammer. Briar has her arcane angle that she can play to like basically chip in consistently and get big defenses. And then Lexi has the consistent dominate on demand with her arrows, where she can basically keep trickling in while playing a kind of different style. But I don't think that always dominating is necessarily the correct answer for her. I think going wider as well is something that you have to be able to do. Or you have to be getting just these huge consistent dominate swings off, which is not to say that you can't. But I think that's something that people necessarily don't always do correct with Lexi. Is dominate's not always the right answer for Bo. But that being said, I think that overall it's actually extremely well balanced. But I do think that people are saying, hey, people don't know how to deal with arcane. Why don't I just play Briar? If you just have 3 people that you play that just they don't understand how to respect your arcane properly and they lose because of that, that's 3 wins that you didn't have to think as hard about, and it's probably less taxing on you as a player. So I don't think necessarily that it's surprising we see as much Briar, but I don't think it's indicative of that sets unbalance when it comes to limited personally.
I think it's people are afraid to kind of pull if you get like a yellow chill, a couple of like chill to the bones in your pool and a couple of okay ice arrows, you can consistently be dropping frostbite tokens as like a Lexi, or even to a degree an Oldhim if you got something that can drop a sufficiently large attack. And if you're getting ice like frostbites onto Briars, like it's the Joe Exotic meme, like they're never going to financially recover from this. Like you disrupt so much of what can be a devastating turn, which is a single frostbite token. Just that one extra resource tax can, you can slow down a Briar by, almost like a turn's worth of damage sometimes.
Absolutely. And I want to be clear that I don't think the set is imbalanced. I told you my record on the day, on the event. I played primarily Oldhim. I think Oldhim is probably just your most consistent in sealed and draft, meaning it's hard to make a bad Oldhim deck, and his reactions are amazing against both Lexi and Briar when played correctly, when predicting when they're going to be swinging Rosetta Thorn on their next attack. So, yes, Briar's very good, but I also think there's some groupthink going on, and like you said, just aversion to blocking the physical damage. People are defaulting to old school blitz where you just race down, and that's not the current format.
Dude, I was impressed with how many outs like Lexi has. Like, those arrows have these like decent on hit effects, and you can really force through some devastating like on hit effects if you get like an electrify down and you fuse like one of those electric arrows. Like you can race that arcane that a Briar has if you
For sure.
Or make him discard 2 cards.
Yeah.
Which is huge. Talk about discarding cards. Thump as well. I don't want to get too off track, though. So let's go ahead and say we already know what you drafted. We already know what you ended up picking for Swiss here. But walk us a little bit more in depth into your deck. Like, break down what your deck was and what you were most worried about in your matches and current counterplay. Like, what did you not want to see come up against you?
So, I if I had to rate where I was at with my Briar, I would say like it was probably like a 7 out of 10. Like it was meat and potatoes. It had good stuff in it, but it wasn't like, oh, like I think you played somebody who had like 2 Flicker Wisp in their deck. Like it wasn't anything like that. I didn't have a Sting of Sorcery. I didn't have anything that I was like, okay, if I just can get to the point where I got them low and I have this card, I can win, right? I don't think I had any Sigils of Suffering either in my sealed. I had a lot of sealed all in that one weekend, and I haven't had a chance to go over those decks. I do have them still put kind of pieced together for review for later, but I just with how the week's been, I haven't had a chance to really look over them too much. If I'm being 100% honest, but I'm fairly certain I did not have a Sigil of Suffering in my sealed pool. So I didn't have like one of those kind of outs, if you will. But again, it was very what it wants to do, right? It wants to, it has a few Bramble Sparks, it has some Ball Lightnings, it has those things to kind of take the turn it wants to have, but nothing that's like, oh, this is the card I can kind of like clutch on if I need to type situation. So that was kind of like I just wanted to make sure I was just playing kind of straightforward Flesh and Blood, and hitting kind of my angles based off whatever I was drawing, and try and play it around that way. So that was kind of what I was looking at. This is also kind of why I was considering that Lexi pool, because I felt like it had a little more of that spice to it. But at the same time, I did feel like Briar was kind of home for me.
All right. So we're in Swiss. We're playing through our rounds. You're on Briar. You're feeling kind of good with it. I think you had a particular match that some might say was an interesting one against a certain player of renown. Do you want to hit that kind of highlight? And I guess we can kind of spin off into talking about how you felt like you were going into the different matchups with your build.
Yeah, I'll get to round 5 in a second. I will say, so I ironically played 3 Oklahomans for my first 3 rounds. 2 from Tulsa, one of which who I personally knew, and one who I had met for the first time, but it was definitely 3 Oklahomans. And then I played one of our locals, Marcus, in round 2, which was just always unfortunate to like pair up against somebody early that personally, that's kind of from your local meta, because like, oh, okay, we drive all the way down here just to match into each other. Not to say that I hate playing these people, but just you come to these big events, you want to meet new people. It's kind of that cool thing to like get to meet people you wouldn't normally get to meet. For instance, round 4, I played someone from Louisiana. I'm probably not going to get to play them outside of a big event like this, just because I'm not driving to Louisiana anytime soon. But yeah, I will say that round 1 was actually like a match that I know for a fact I should have lost had they played different lines. So looking back on that, like that was like a weird moment, like kind of threw me off my groove a little bit, I will say, because I was like, oh, okay, well we've dodged one bad beat, so hopefully we continue on and don't have to hit another one of those. But it did like shake my confidence a little bit, but not enough to like really throw me off my game. So in round 4 we get to take a break for like lunch. And I know I'm 4-0 at that point, and I'm talking with people, and pretty much everybody's saying, like, mathematically, as long as you win your next round, you should be totally fine. You should be a shoo-in for at least making the top 64 cut. And that's feeling pretty good. And then we get announced our pairings for round 5, and I look down at my phone, and I see that I paired versus Matt Rogers. And I'm like, well, this will be great. So, obviously a little nervous going into that one. He is a well-renowned player, but I don't really try and think too much about that type of stuff whenever I'm going into a match. I don't, go, oh, it's Matt Rogers, I'm just lost. I tend to go, well, it's a player, and I play Flesh and Blood too. That's kind of the mentality I have. You don't really know what's going to happen until you put the cards on the table, and that's just what you got to do. You just got to play the game. So we played, and he was an absolute joy to play against. He was a really cool guy. It was a lot of fun. We, wasn't like overly chatty, but also like we had, some, chit chat going on during the game and things like that. And it was definitely a moment where I came in as like, took a little bit of a risk on some damage that I took to try and like gain the tempo, if you will, of the game. This thing I personally refer to as like jockeying for tempo. So like I took some damage to try and like steal it. Kind of like how like sometimes you have to like take a risky, like a jockey in a horse race would kind of like cut on the inside, which can be really dangerous, but you're having to like try and get that positioning in the game. And so I took a little bit more damage than I was really happy to be taking, but I was hoping to grab the tempo with that. And during that turn, he was at 11 HP, and he's looking at his hand, and he says to me, "I don't think I can win this game." And so it was at that point in the game where I'm like, okay, so as long as I don't have a really bad draw or I don't mess up, I should be able to close this out. So, from that point on, I'm just locked in. I'm just trying to play as, clean flesh and blood as I possibly can, and I ended up taking the game, which was, awesome. And he ended up telling me that I was the first person in the U.S. to beat him at that event. So he had been there the day prior and, not lost a single game. He had started the event and not dropped a game up until that point. And so I was the first person at the Dallas Calling to actually beat Matt Rogers, which was a cool incident to have happen.
It is very cool, and honestly, where you said you treat everybody as just another flesh and blood player, I honestly think I would have struggled with that. I watched the Fab with Matt videos. I think he is a wonderful player. I love watching him on stream, that kind of thing. I would have been a bit imposed, let's say, right? And I feel like I'm fairly good at the game, but I still would have been a bit imposed there. So I'm glad you were able to kind of keep it together. Had you made the same read he had when he was at 11 health, were you confident, or were you just kind of still in your own mindset?
I will say, like, so on that turn, like, again, like, it was one of those things like, okay, and like I had I guess a little bit of like, oh, this might be a mistake feeling, and that was mostly because of that first game that I brought up, because I had done something similar in that game where I was like, okay, I'm gonna take some damage. I'm gonna take like 5 damage that I probably shouldn't be taking here to come back for like 12. 12's a big number. Surely that will let me grab the tempo and just run away with this game. He proceeded to come back for 15, if not more, that turn. I do not remember the exact number that he was presenting me, but it was much larger than the number I presented the turn before, which was my crazy turn. And so something like that could have happened in the same game, and I don't think I would have been able to recover. But I did know the statistical odds of that happening were fairly low, right? Like, it's sealed. You don't get to craft your deck. You don't get to choose the exact cards you get to put into it. So him being 4-0, he probably had a pretty decent Briar pool. He was also on Briar. But also, the chances that he is A, has all those good cards in his deck, B, has pulled them that particular turn, C, can take all the damage that I'm throwing at him this particular turn, and still have that crazy turn, were lower, right? So I knew there was a calculated risk. Like I said, he was at 11. We were starting to get to those points where I can present lethal if I have a big turn. And so it was one of those types of things where I had calculated out my risk. I knew that felt like it was a good risk to take. Was I still a little nervous going into it? Absolutely. But as soon as he, mentioned that he didn't see his out that turn, I felt like I had it. Because if he didn't have an out that particular turn, I felt like I had the tempo, and with the tempo, I was going to be able to close it.
Okay.
Nice.
Do you have anything else about Swish you'd like to cover, or should we hit up some listener questions before we move on to drafts?
I mean, like, I will say, like, shout out to all the people that I played in Swiss. They were all super pleasant to play against and, enjoyable conversations. I don't want to spend a lot of time getting into a bunch of names just because we have so many people, or so much we have to talk about today. But, just general shout out to the community. It was a good time, and a lot of really close, awesome games.
Cool. Well, I guess we'll move into that first of those listener questions we have. And the first one we have here is, what do you think makes this card game unique?
So my personal favorite thing about this game is that I feel like every card has a big value to it. The fact that every card can be used for resources, every card can defend. For the most part, every card can defend. Obviously we have a few that can't. But every card has those values associated with them. And so, like, that's where I've mentioned to lots of people, I have almost always hated limited in almost every other game I've played. And that was specifically because you'd be getting a limited pool, you'd be drafting, and you get down to like, I have to take this card, and you just hate every second of it. Like, for instance, let me just take this, in Magic, this Goblin that costs 3 and is a 2/2 and has no ability. It's just blatantly a bad card. And yeah, there isn't a magic to making that work, right, and winning with a card like that. But also, it just feels bad to play it whenever your opponent might pull off like something crazy, and you're sitting here with all these crappy goblins in your hand that don't really do a whole lot. It just doesn't feel great. Whereas in Flesh and Blood, I feel like every card can have value to it, and so taking a mediocre hand and making it sing feels so good and so enjoyable that it's what makes me really like limited in this game, especially this set in particular. I feel like there's a lot of those opportunities with the fusion and things like that to make a can that doesn't look great suddenly really have a moment, which is really cool. And I don't feel like you get that as much in other card games. Um, and so I think that's a big part of it for me, is that I feel like on almost every turn, and that's not to say this happens every game, but on a lot of turns, like I feel like I have some choices to be made. It's not just like I have to do these things because my opponent has forced me into this situation. There are some choices to be made, and those choices will have consequences, but those choices also can have huge benefits as well.
Okay.
So I'm also getting the impression that you just don't like red in Magic.
I did not. I was
safe?
a blue-black
Yeah.
control player, and people hated me.
Yeah, I can tell.
Blue black's
Hating
the right
on
decision.
mono red burn. Ugh. Goblins are friends.
I'm not gonna lie. There's some pretty strong personality call-outs in your deck choices there, guys. Don't want to dive too much into the psychology of that, but there's some pretty strong personality ticks that I just heard, and I feel like they fit both of you well. What decks you would play? Now, I wasn't a Magic player, so I can't be typed here.
Yeah, you can.
Now I'm just curious.
He's white-red, right?
Oh, Adam?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I could see him playing green ramp.
Oh, green ramp too. Yeah, I could see that too.
Yeah.
I was thinking more of token spam.
Oh, Drayton. Token spam. Actually, red-green token spam out of Innistrad was fun.
We're
Oh,
off
the
topic
dog
though,
was-
so.
This is
Yeah,
all
we're off topic
meaningless
again.
to me.
Okay,
but
so-
I have learned things about myself. All right, Shay, take us back away.
Yeah, so Drayton, what's your current weakest area of play? And then what can you do to improve this? And I think they're kind of getting at, like, how do you assess where, like, you feel like if you have a deficiency in, like, your play or something, and how do you go about first isolating, analyzing, and then improving that kind of weakness?
Yeah,
I'll
so
clarify, talk to this listener. They did say that they were struggling being self-aware of their play.
all right. So one thing that I will definitely mention is like, so when I was first getting into this game, I had the time to do this. Like, first of all, I want to make that very clear. Like, this was not me like saying like, hey, the only way you can get better at this game is to do this. This was something that I had the time to do, and so I felt like it would be good for me to do. Was I set up a webcam and I tried to get a game a night. And by doing that, I was kind of like getting just a casual game on webcam, one blitz, one CC, something. So it didn't really matter what kind of game I was getting. I just wanted to get games in because I was like, I haven't played enough of this particular game to feel comfortable in how to do things. And so I wanted to see more of the interactions. I wanted to experience more of the side things that you wouldn't normally see in like bigger events even. And so that was something that I did. Me personally, anytime that I am trying to assess how I'm playing something, I'll think how could that choice have been different in like particularly a turn. One big thing in this game is also equipment. So like let's say for instance especially in limited where like you have equipment that gets expended a lot of time. Anytime I lose a game and I still have equipment up, I'm like, where could I have used that? Where should I have used that equipment to make me maybe not lose this game? Because if I'm winning and I have equipment up, cool, awesome. But if I'm losing and I have equipment up, well, that was just wasted. I never used it. I might as well not had it out. So that's something I'm always trying to look at is, my resources, how am I using them, things of that nature. It's the way my brain processes things personally is very different than I know some people. Like, I know, Adam, you take a lot of handwritten notes, things like that. Me, I kind of more assess in the moment, and then I kind of internalize that and just move on. So I don't take as many handwritten notes because of that. For instance, like I didn't even have sideboard notes for Road to Nationals. I just knew what my boarding was for my matchups, which was weird to a lot of people. But that's just how my brain happens to work. One thing like I will say like that I feel like I'm still kind of working on is trigger cleanliness. So for example, and I'll talk more on exactly this incident later when we talk more about it. But there was an incident where I did technically miss a trigger. It got ruled that I was not allowed to then use that trigger, and so it may have cost me a game. And so like that's something where like if I had been more clear and pronounced about saying exactly when the trigger happened, that I was announcing it and triggering it and doing all those things, That's something that I obviously need to clean up if I'm playing at these higher level tables. So an easy way for me to work on that is just work on that in casual games. Like just be very obnoxious about announcing all my triggers. Not, and if I miss one, like just accepting like, hey, okay, I'm gonna sacrifice not having this thing to punish myself maybe a little bit. Now, if you don't learn through punishing yourself, don't do it. That doesn't work for everybody. So like if negative consequences don't affect you really much, don't hurt yourself just for the sake of trying to learn if it's not actually going to help you. Kind of figure out how you personally learn, and then lean into that is what I would say. Because everyone learns differently, and I'm speaking that just not even as just a Flesh and Blood player. I'm a teacher as a profession. Everyone learns very differently, and so if you can figure out how you process things, then you can lean into that and really start to flourish more.
Yeah, and a big thing is actually one thing I like to do is I call it the critical self-analysis of like my play. So like after a match, I like to go and like pace myself back through that game to find the points that were the pivots where I made my mistake. So as I'm playing, like I know I've gotten now to where I can pick out like where I made my play mistakes, where it's, instead of arsenaling card X, I, played it, or I pitched here when I should have pitched this. And then, when my deck cycled through, I would have had X resource instead of Y resource. And then for like play patterns, especially for like pitching, because pitching's such a unique mechanic in this game, some of my early games, like I just focused it around experimenting with my pitch and what I pitch and like how quickly that can come back to me and all of that. So I like isolating like play pattern variables and experimenting with that and changing up my play and everything. But I'm also, I admit, weird when I come to how I analyze my play.
Everybody has their things. I mean, I struggle with pitch zone stacking. I think that's really probably currently my weakest, especially knowing exactly when that's going to come back up. I do sometimes plan turns, but I'm still, this is going to come up in 1 or 2 turns. Sometimes I will have stacked the wrong amount of blues in that area. I'm still just a little bit weak on that, whereas I know some players that do become a bit more cognizant about that will literally be able to tell you I'm 3 turns away from drawing these 4 cards.
Right. Another thing is like if you have strong players in your meta, especially if they have like a buy-in around, ask them to watch you. Like ask people to just watch you play that you consider have strong opinions on things and good opinions on things. Be like, hey, can you watch like this turn, or like if you're like, okay, I'm between these 2 choices, I don't know which one's the right one. Be like, hey, can you look at my hand and my arsenal? I want to talk to you about this turn after the game. See if you agree with my choices. Like even something as simple as that. Sometimes like that discussion can be really fruitful. There have been times where Adam and I have been practicing something, and we've just like stopped the game and been like, hey, I'm going to show you my hand so we can talk through a turn. Things like that can be super helpful. It doesn't always have to be like we're playing for realsies. It can sometimes just be we're playing to learn. And sometimes those games are more beneficial than just playing in a skirmish.
Yeah,
I mean,
rewinding back through interactions is a great way to kind of like reassess how a different line of play could have played out.
Yep. Often there's a huge difference between an experienced player, the way they will play a hand, and an inexperienced player. But even 2 very experienced players can do different sequencing, can see different lines of play, and it's just important, and it's great to hear sometimes. Okay, so let's move further. Let's go into the draft side. I know you did draft for the top 64 the same day. You then cut to the next day, top 32. I want to keep those 2 things a bit shorter, kind of focusing on the top 8, but let's talk a little bit about how you feel you read the signals in draft. Do you feel like you read them well? And how well do you think those rounds went for you?
I think I have a pretty good draft read at this point. Some people might disagree with me based off what happened in the top 8, but we can discuss that more in detail when we get there. So top 64, I drafted Lexi. I went more of a pretty heavy lightning build because I was getting pushed out of ice. So I saw that ice was not very open. I felt that Lexi was very open though, and it felt like it was, I was seeing some lines of play to my seat. Now that build could go very wide and was fairly strong in those regards. I think I got 4 I'm blanking on names right now, but basically the arrow that costs nothing but can go again if you fuse it.
Dazzling
Crescendo,
Yep.
yes. I had 4 red Dazzling Crescendos, and I think a yellow one as well. Yeah, 4. 4 was the number I said there. And so like my ability to go wide with that deck was scary. Now I could only have 1 card in the arsenal, but if I started my turn with one of those already there, all I had to do was fuse it, and we're off to the races. It felt pretty good. Now, and this is a thing with Lexi though, is you have to see the right cards in the right sequencing, which I did not see in my first game. So shout out to Stephen Woolley from Team Covenant. He absolutely stomped me with his deck, and he was my first loss of the day. He saw all of his lines, and I saw none of mine. And he was like, he even said after the game, he was like, "Yeah, my deck should not have done that well. That was gross." But and I was like, "Yeah, my deck should not have done that poorly, but that was gross." So that happened, but didn't do as well as I wanted to with that pull, but okay games overall. I ended up going 1 and 2, unfortunately with that. The top 32. So as I mentioned, I played Steve in round 1. I knew he drafted Briar the night before. He was positioned to my left in that draft pod, so I knew he had some buyer's remorse with picking Briar in draft the day before. Because of this, and because of what I saw in my opening pack, I think I saw like a red Bramble Spark, and I was like, okay, I think if I hard force Briar and telegraph to my side of the table that somebody is already on Briar early, it might scare enough of them off to leave it open enough for me for the rest of the pack. This was a gamble. I knew it was a gamble, and I was ready to flex away because I was like, I'm going to do this for 3 packs, then I'm going to start going Elemental. If I never use those 3 cards, that sucks, but it's very early in the draft. I can recover. I want to take this gamble and see where it goes. And it ended up paying off for me. I felt like I drafted a very strong Briar line. Ended up going 3-0 in that pod, which obviously did well for me. But it was definitely a gamble, and it's not something I necessarily recommend to players to do. But based off what I knew outside of like the situation, the psychology of the table, and the positioning of where players were, I decided it was worth taking that risk. Now I later found out that Steven pack 1 pick 1 opened a Winter's Whale, so my actions had 0 effect on him. He was on Oldheim from pack 1, but ultimately that was what I tried doing.
Okay, I like that there was at least logic behind it, and I don't think there's anything wrong with kind of adding that level of read to the table.
Absolutely, and I was having to then like be very careful about what's coming to me. Am I still seeing like the elements that I need to be seeing? Am I still seeing Briar cards? Right, that was stuff that I was watching for as cards were getting past me, and I was for several packs I was still getting past strong Elemental for Briar and strong Briar cards. So I felt like, yes, I have made a good choice. That doesn't mean there's not another Briar at the table. There definitely was another Briar at the table, but it was open enough for me to craft a good deck at that point, and so I stuck with it.
So you didn't just take the patented shave method of hate drafting every red Bramble Spark, because that just means it's one less red Bramble Spark to hurt you.
No, I did not take that method.
This is not endorsed. This is not endorsed as a viable strategy. All right, so I think we're finally to the top 8 cut. This draft ended up with 5 players on Briar, which is just shocking to me, and you were one of them. So can you talk a little bit about why you feel like this was, and just your feelings on what happened there, why that situation occurred?
So Briar was obviously doing very, very, very well up until that point. I do know, based off the composition of like what I learned about the history of some of the players there, that some of them were newer to Flesh and Blood. Like I still consider myself new, and I started in the spring. And some of these people were talking about having started that month. Now that's not to say they weren't good players. They were very like, for instance, I believe it was Eric. Sternheim. I think I'm butchering his last name, but he was who I played round 1, and we got to talk for a bit because we were waiting for taking our match. I think he was only a month or 2 into the game, but had like a ton of Magic limited experience. So I think in a situation like that where you're like, I've been doing well with Briar, I know Briar, I'm gonna go Briar. He even talked about how he nearly swapped over to Oldheim, reading some of those signals, but ultimately decided to stay Briar. Um, types of things like that where you have that like I've been doing so well with it, I don't want to get off of it type feeling, and I think that sometimes that's what happens with players. I will say for me personally, I was sandwiched between the Oldhim and one of the Lexi players, so my reads were a little weird going into that. So like at the start of each pack, it felt like Briar was very open for me, but ultimately by the halfway through each pack, it was very close. And so because of I was getting past and the reads I was getting to make, I saw that there was an opening for me to at one point switch over to Lexi. By the time that I felt like I really needed to, the time had come and passed for me to be able to do so. Ultimately, I did draft, I think, a very acceptable Briar deck based off what we saw at the table. I ended up with about an even split of non-attack actions and attack actions, which is usually something I'm looking to do as Briar. I want to have a good mix of both in order to be viable. I even had 2 Sigils of Suffering. They were both blue, but I did have 2 Sigils of Suffering, which is a nice win condition that I had in that top 8 draft. That did get past to me. One of them all the way back around that I passed earlier, hoping that it would make it back to me, and it did. And again, I think that was because people were just like in the Briar desperate for non-attack actions, but by assessing that non-attack actions were what I needed to focus on in that draft, I was able to not have to have any. I didn't have a single cracked bauble in my top 8 deck. I ended up with 31 cards because I just wanted to have one extra blue attack action in case I needed it to just kind of get my numbers where I wanted them. But having something like that going into that, despite there being 5 at the table, I felt like I was able to draft something that gave me angles to play. Were they angles I was super excited to be playing? No. But they were angles nonetheless where I felt like I could levy a win versus a lot of different decks.
So I don't think I know this. Were there cracked bubbles in other decks at the top 8?
Absolutely.
Okay. I wasn't certain if that ended up being the case.
I know. So, for instance, Eric in my match, there was a turn where he even pitched 2 of them. So I know for certain he had that, and he let my final attack through. So based off of that, I have to assume that because he did not block, he did not have the means to block enough of the damage in order. So he may have had even more in hand that turn, or just other non-blocking cards in hand. I don't know. I didn't see his hand. He didn't show it to me after he said no blocks and went to shake my hand. So I don't know the exact details behind that. But it was definitely one of those things where like it definitely affected his deck a lot because he was not able to control when he was and was not blocking, if you will. And obviously cracked baubles don't do anything. They only pitch for 2. They are not ideal cards to have in your deck. So I know he had a very minimum 2. And I believe somebody said they looked through the draft list, which were all posted online, what we drafted. And so, like, adding up the cards, you could see that certain people didn't have enough to just field a full deck.
Gotcha.
Cool. So, yeah. I guess for those matches, so... I guess we kind of touched on your top 8. What about your semifinals match?
Yeah, so I mean, people have asked me if like I got outplayed or if I made mistakes. I will say I think it's a little bit of obviously like he was on Lexi, so I feel like draft wise he made a very wise decision of not going the Briar direction. That again being sandwiched between 2 different heroes, my reads were a little wonky. I did obviously assess certain things correctly, was able to make a decent deck out of it, but I will say that there was definitely a misplay on my end. So turn 1, I did not announce my trigger of making an embodiment before saying that I was arsenaling a card. He said that I had missed that trigger. We asked the judges. They ruled in his favor, which is, fine. I did miss the trigger. It is acceptable. But that did mean that my card blocked for 1 less that next turn. This caused me to lose 1 extra health that turn, which ultimately meant that his final attack that he presented to me at the very end of the game was for lethal and not for lethal -1. So I would have been at 1 health had I had that embodiment and everything had gone the same throughout the rest of the game. Which I don't think anything would have necessarily changed based off his attack lines, based off my attack lines. I don't think anything else would have changed except for I would have had 1 extra health, which would have meant that next turn I would have been coming back at him for 8 damage because of the cards that I had in hand. I had a Entwine Earth and an Earth card and a card to pay with it. The last card I would have had would have been going to blocking a Dominate attack, so nothing would have changed there. And I think that 8 damage swing may have put me in a position where he has to block enough damage to not die, and even if he goes down to 1, if I draw my last Sigil of Suffering on that next turn, it doesn't matter what he has, I kill him. That being said, I might not have drawn that. He may have had his red arrow. I'm not saying that I would have won the game had that embodiment trigger not happened, but I do think I might have had a chance at it had that not happened. But ultimately, again, that's why I mentioned that that's something that I need to be more proactive about, is announcing all those correctly and triggering them at the correct time. It was a small mistake, but ultimately, it was a mistake, and it's something that I have to own up to.
Yep, that's very fair. Honestly, sorry, Shay, but I was just going to say I think this leads into something very specific. So a lot of our listeners asked about this. I was reticent to touch on it at all, but you did mention play mistakes. So it does seem like we had a play mistake in the final match. A player utilized Deep Blue as an instance in the final match instead of as an action. Do you have any thoughts or comments on this? I personally just want to say I feel like it was a long day. Anyone who plays that many matches, I'm somewhat willing to forgive, but I'm just interested in what you think.
I will say, definitely, mistakes of that nature happen at all levels. In that same game, I will say I got a little frustrated at this, after him, making me call out the embodiment at its very specific timing. He didn't announce for me to trigger to pay for a Chilling Ice Vein, and I was like, are you going to announce that you have hit me with the Chilling Ice Vein, so then I have to pay 1 or discard a card? So I ended up, just for time's sake, announcing it myself, because it's a detrimental trigger. It has to go through. I'm not going to play like that. That's not just how I am. But, it definitely, you can miss things. It is a long, taxing day. You are trying to fire your cylinders at 150% the whole time you're there. Even between matches, I didn't stop thinking about the game while I was between matches. I was still thinking of, play lines in my own deck. Okay, if I match into this hero, what am I going to do to try and, win that matchup, right? What are all my play lines? If I see these cards in my hand, what can I do with them? Things like that were things that I was thinking about even when I wasn't playing. So, it wasn't like I was relaxing. I was, that's just not how my brain works. So it was a very taxing day. I do think that, again, hopefully with judge presence, you would hope that more of these things would get caught. But again, our judge program is still growing. And if you think that we need stronger judge representation, if that's something you personally believe, then again, do something about it. I think that this is more on us as a community to do better than for us to point fingers and place blame any particular way. I don't think anything was intentionally done to gain an advantage. I think it was just honest mistakes that both players made, judges made as well, and these things will happen. But if we want better, we have to act for it. This is something you and I have personally talked about, Adam, is hey, if we want to have a great community, we have to be those members of the community who are going to push the community to be better. We can't just be man, I wish my community would just do more events and be awesome. We can't just sit back and hope that happens. We have to be proactive about making those things happen. Otherwise, we can't expect anything to change.
Yeah, and it's also a byproduct. As you get more judges at these higher levels, it feels like they didn't quite maybe have enough of the judges at the level to active judge on these final tables to kind of rotate people out, keeping them fresh. Because, people are oh, you're just watching the game. Well, it's it's cool, man, but active judging is a pretty involved process, and it is about a brain melt as it is for the players to a degree. Now, setting it home on, watching the stream where you can reverse and everything, and yeah, you can armchair judge really well when you can cross-reference and you're not dealing with time restraints, but it is a logistical thing where, yeah, if you've been going at it for 8 hours as a judge, you might make a mistake, especially if pace of play is moving really quick. And it is something that I think on that kind of administrative level, a kind of moment of self-reflection and see what you can do to kind of alleviate that level of kind of strain on your judges, be it a rotation or something. Just give people where they're going to be more effective at this active judging, because played a bunch of different card games. It's oh, this is outrage. It happens in everything, man. People are human. Hindsight on, when you're watching a stream or a playback video is 50-50 or 20-20 or whatever numbers. So
I mean, Adam, you and I both made a judge miscall during our own skirmish season with Exude Confidence. We were so confident that we were playing it correctly, and only to find out the next day that we had ruled that incorrectly. Things happen. Mistakes get made.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually not malice. But if you want to see better, do better.
So I guess now we'll move on to the thing everyone wants to know. Drayton, your prize. You got to pull the shiny of shinies at random. What card did you pull?
I very luckily got a gold foil Arknight Grasp, which is a card I am very excited to own now and have part of my collection. I know there will be people curious, so I am planning on keeping it. My current plan with it is to get it graded, so that way it's in a nice protective box so I can have fun with it until I need a house and then sell it.
And you feel obligated to play only Runeblade from now on, right?
I will definitely be having a lot of Runeblade in my future once that thing is nicely slabbed up, and hopefully with a nice BGS grade to go with it. It is still sealed the same way that they gave it to me, so that is not changing until it goes to the hands of a grader.
I mean, I couldn't be more happy for you, both for your placing and for the fact that you happened to get probably what would be the best possible legendary for you. So,
I mean, outside of the gold tunic, this is the next best thing, honestly, for me. And Runeblade is my favorite class to tool around with and play. I've always stated that flavor-wise, Runeblade is home for me. That's why I know a lot of people are griping about Briar, but I was excited, and I was also okay with the chain changes, because I was like, ooh, now he's interesting to play too. It's Christmas came early for me, so I'm very excited to have that again as part of my collection now, and it is cool. It's also nice to have the Pro Tour invite token to expend at my leisure. I did notice that it looks like next summer there is an event that I would be poised nicely to be able to prep for and then go to, which is super exciting for me, to just not even have to worry about if I will, have the ELO all ready for that event, or if I can just click a button and I get to go. So those are all cool things for me. Again, it was a surreal experience. I'm not gonna say that I wasn't oh man, I'm so close, I wish I could have gone all the way. I'm not gonna say there weren't any feelings of that, but I was on cloud 9 throughout all of it. I honestly was just hoping to make day 2 and make a good showing of everything, and the fact that I was able to go to not just the top 8 but the top 4 was a super awesome experience.
I was excited for you too, Drayton, because you just man, we just got all kinds of podcast clout now.
As per everyone involved's request, I did shout out our podcast as much as humanly possible. So
we appreciate that.
Yeah.
I tried in the side events. I was playing the good guy chatty player for the weekend.
And people are just concerned about me. So
concerned.
Like, what's wrong with that guy?
Oh, Shay's not near as bad of a player as he tries to convince people he is.
Oh, it wasn't my play. No, it was the fact that I was more coffee than man at that point.
But that was definitely true. You were energetic.
You were the child from Talladega Nights who's I'm all jacked up on Mountain Dew.
Yeah, man.
100%.
That was you, Shay.
Coffee is love. Coffee is life.
Also realized somebody keeps telling me I say 100% too much, and it's true. So
is
I
it
apologize.
100% true?
It is 100% true. So if you're playing the drinking game, it's late, and I said it again.
My wife let me know that calling things a dumpster fire was my drinking game phrase. She's like, I went up with you guys playing cards once, and it was like every other word was just dumpster fire. But maybe that was an L5R thing.
Yeah, I feel bad. I realized I said it, and a listener did point it out to me. So calling myself on it, I'm sorry. Okay.
Oh, man.
We have any other wrap-ups for the DFW calling?
I mean, I do want to say, like, a huge shout out to our community. I want to say, like, I know at least one for sure. Josh, if you're listening to this at all, like, you were my driving buddy down to the calling and back, and the fact that you just decided, you know what, I'm just gonna take it easy on Sunday and just like be there to support my fellow community member was totally cool. Basically he checked in with me after like the first drive and was like, hey man, I'm just taking it easy today, so like if you need a drink, if you need food, if you need anything, you just wave me down and I'll be there. Having somebody that's in your corner like when you're all stressed out and trying to go for the gold is pretty nice. But I had a lot of other community members who were just like chilling and watching my games at the end there. Ian was another one who like kind of was like chilling and watching at the end there, and just like making sure that like, hey, if I needed anything or I just like needed like, hey, look, you did the good type support. Having people like do that and acknowledging that, it's cool. It was very nice, and feeling supported by the community always feels great. So. Shout out to all you guys. I know there are other names that I'm not mentioning, but like, if I try and go through the whole list, then it's just going to take too long.
I mean, we're thankfully lucky enough to have such a good community. There are a lot of people to shout out.
For sure.
Also, Kodachi for 3 community, if you would comment or some way on social media and let us know what title should we add to Drayton, because I've been pushing for Breaker of Matt Rogers and the Golden Arknight. I'm trying to get him a Daenerys Targaryen-esque title going here.
I want to be very clear. I did not request this, nor was I aware that he was going to ask you all what I should be called.
I want to be clear that I don't think you have broken Matt Rogers. But
I 100% have not. I'm not claiming that either. Just be very clear.
So I'm really working on it. We're workshopping it. If the community wants to help me, we're gonna get this meme going. It's gonna be very much like the con that was promised for the Jade Throne.
What is happening right now?
All right. Well, I didn't know this was occurring either. But it's already been said. So
yeah.
Thanks for listening. We've been Kodachi for 3. As always, we want to thank you, our listeners, and the overall Flesh and Blood community, which we have covered this evening, for making it a fun, welcoming, and exciting game to be a part of. We are, of course, past 100 followers on Facebook, and we will guarantee another giveaway at 250, or at a specific number of downloads via the podcast platforms. Either way, to be eligible, you do need to find and follow us on Facebook. Right now, we have quite a few download people who are not following us. I would appreciate it if you'd follow us, just because then we can get your name for giveaways. So if you're able to do that, that would be great. This podcast is sponsored by Edmund Unplugged in Oklahoma and is the home store of all your hosts. Thanks again for listening, and enjoy playing in the Flesh and Blood.
Thanks for listening and being a part of the Flesh and Blood community. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more, please share us, leave us a like or a review. If you want to engage with us directly, please find us on Facebook at Kodachi43. And remember, we are available for download on all major podcast providers. Thanks again for listening, and we will see you again in 2 weeks. Until then, enjoy playing Flesh and Blood.
gas. Like it's a closing. It can turn a mediocre like attack into a closer.